Amy Bowe is a hormonal and training coach and the founder of the Warrior School for Women. The Warrior School is the first of its kind to bring training and the menstrual cycle together. I was recently introduced to Amy as I was looking for a fitness coach to help me reach some of my own personal training goals and was super intrigued by her methods of incorporating both fitness and the cycle to maximize our goals. So I thought it would be super interesting to get her on here to explain the science of our cycle and the impact our cycle has on meeting fitness goals. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. These are some
Aw.
of my favorite topics to talk about.
It sounds like it. Well, it seems like you're just the expert on all things hormones and working out and meeting those goals. So talk to us. Tell us why hormonal health, let's start out with why is hormonal health so important?
Yeah, great question. The first thing when you ask that comes to mind for me is that our cycle and our hormones are one way that we can know our body. And I believe when we know our body, we trust it, we have more confidence in it, we understand it, and then therefore we know how to support it the best. Whereas, if we don't understand our hormones, our cycle, it creates this disconnection. And, we weren't really taught this in school. Yeah, I've done 2 degrees, both in the health space. And we weren't even really taught about the science of the cycle, our hormones, the role that our hormones play, not only in our health, but also in our performance and our training, which we will talk about in the later video. So yeah, the first piece I think for me is this trusting of the body, connected to the body, understanding your own body. And they talk about it as a big red balloon rule. And that is no cycle is the same. My cycle is different to your cycle is different to mine. And our cycles can be different depending on what's going on in our life. So the way that I like to talk about it is using an umbrella analogy. So imagine an umbrella, and an umbrella has all of these prongs that when we pop it up, we need these prongs to be working so the umbrella pops up and the umbrella works. It does its job. Now, if one or more of those prongs aren't working right, it's going to affect the shape and the job of the umbrella. And so I like to think of the umbrella as our nervous system, how well our body is functioning. Now, if we have a lot of prongs that are broken and aren't working right, our body's not going to be functioning optimally. And then that will affect not only our health, but our training and our performance. So my work is in the training prong, the nutrition prong, and the menstrual cycle prong. Now, there are loads of other prongs that can impact our health. And, if they're not working, that creates stress. So we have our environment, our relationships, maybe any trauma we've been through, medical conditions, all of these things are prongs. So when we look at the menstrual cycle prong, if it's not working right, it's telling us that there's something wrong with our umbrella, that some other prongs are working, which is creating stress. Now, if we're in our cycle years, our cycle should arrive regularly, on time, and mostly without symptoms. And that is it can blow people's minds because we're so used to hearing about or experiencing irregular cycles, painful cycles, lots of symptoms with our cycles. So the first piece is you have an umbrella, your cycle is a prong. My cycle and my umbrella is different to yours. Now, there are loads of things that can affect our cycle. My cycle should arrive regularly, on time, and mostly without symptoms.
That was actually going to be my question. How do we know if our cycle isn't optimal? Because I think you're right. Most people just expect it to be irregular or different every month. There's so many factors. So I think that's super interesting to know. Yeah, we all should have a regular, healthy cycle every month.
Yeah.
Full stop. That's phenomenal.
Full stop. Exclamation mark. No, but we can totally we'll dive into like why we should and what's actually happening.
Right.
So if we don't have a regular cycle that arrives on time, what's happening is that the body is stressed because the brain, the female body is designed to reproduce. Whether or not we want to reproduce or not, that doesn't matter. That's what it's designed for, is reproduction. So the brain says, okay, is it a good time? Is it a good time to reproduce? Do I have all the resources that I need? Are all my prongs good in my umbrella? And if the brain goes, like I've got a broken prong here and here and here, and there's too much stress going on, the brain will send a signal down to the ovaries and it'll actually slow the pulses down for our hormones. And so this is when we can start to see irregular cycles and sometimes even no cycles, because the brain is telling the body, this is not a great time to reproduce. We just do not have the resources. So we need to slow this system down. So we might not ovulate. Our cycles could be really long, or we may not even have a cycle at all. So it's all linked back to stress. Right. And if the body perceives that it's too stressful, it can affect our cycle. So when we look at, if we don't have a cycle, we need to go and look at what's creating the stress. What prongs in our life are causing the biggest stress on the body that's affecting the cycle. We're meant to go through 4 phases. So we could break it down really simply. It's 2. It's like the first half, which is the follicular phase, and then the second half, which is the luteal phase. But we can actually break it down, and it is 4 phases. So phase 1 is when we bleed. So that's from day 1 until the end of our bleed. Now that can last for some women 3 days they bleed, some women bleed for 7. Anything longer than 7 or shorter than 2, there's something going on. And if you see patterns in that, remember, we always want to go with patterns. We don't want to just go off one cycle. And if something's not right, we just think, oh no, it's patterns. What do I notice after 3 or 4 cycles? So if you're noticing bleeding less than 2, more than 7, after a few, something might be going on. Now, when we're in this first phase, our hormones are at their lowest. They're flatlined. Mm-hmm. And so from a physiological perspective, we're actually quite similar to males, our hormonal structure. It's very flat, very low. Now, that's the first phase. And then we enter into the second phase, which is when we stop bleeding up until ovulation. Now, we'll go for an example of a textbook cycle, which is around 28 days. So if I have a 28-day cycle, this second phase is going to go from, maybe 5, 7 days up until around 14 days. And this is the second phase. And some stuff starts to happen here. What starts to happen is that follicle stimulating hormone starts to pulse. So we get this pulse system, and it pulses for estrogen, which is our dominant hormone in the first phase of our cycle. So FSH starts to pulse, and then it kind of invites estrogen on stage. And I like to call estrogen Beyonce. She brings the energy, the focus. She can learn complex dance routines. We'll talk about her more when it comes to our training and our fitness. But she starts to rise at around day 7 to 10, depending on the length of our cycle. And then we enter the third phase, which is ovulation. So a lot of women think that we need to bleed. We don't actually need to bleed. Yes, we need to shed the uterine lining. It's important, but we actually need to ovulate. So it should be called the ovulatory cycle. That's the key main event, which happens around that mid-cycle phase, around day 14, 15. And so we should ovulate. And then we enter into the last phase, which is the luteal phase. And in this phase, we get this spike of luteinizing hormone, which pulses for progesterone. And progesterone is the dominant hormone in the second phase of our cycle. So we've got this pulse system, and we've got this, this system that goes up and down. Our hormones change during our cycle, and that's really important to understand. Where am I in my cycle? And what should my hormones be doing? So, estrogen should be there on stage in the first phase. It drops off a little bit, we ovulate, and then estrogen rises, Progesterone rises, and we call this our high hormone phase, where our hormones are really quite high. And then we get this drop off just before we start our cycle again. So we should go through all these 4 phases.
I love it. What a great way to explain it. I love the Beyonce. That's perfect. And when progesterone rises, that's when I really start to feel like I'm a little sleepier. I'm a little more tired. I kind of crave some food sometimes. So I think, and we talked a little bit about the tracking. And let's just touch on that for a sec, because there's some really great cycle trackers out there. There's one I've been using for probably I don't know how long, maybe 7 years, 6 years, called Period Tracker. And I know there's other ones. There's some really great, you might have other suggestions, but there's some great tracking systems.
Yeah. And that's like what we just spoke about is like we're in our cycle years, which means we've gone through puberty. It's not in the first couple of years of getting the cycle, because like you just said, the first couple of years, actually, it's really hard to find patterns. It can take like a couple of years for a young female to find that cycle regulation. It takes the body a little while to figure out the chaos and find its rhythm. And then when we get into, and this can vary depending on, the female, but we start to get into perimenopause. And so this tends to be, in our 40s, late 40s. And then we get changes to our cycle, and we're moving towards menopause. And menopause is really just one day, and that day marks 12 months since our last menstrual cycle. So we can say we're menopausal or postmenopausal once we've reached that criteria. Now we have this little gap between like our regular cycle years and menopause, and it's perimenopause. Now, that's a whole nother different story, and we can go on a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
And it's, it can be not fun for a lot of women. And what starts to happen when we go into perimenopause is that estrogen actually goes on a roller coaster ride. So we've got these really big up and downs of estrogen, and we've got this decline of progesterone. And with that, we can start to feel like a lot of symptoms. We can get a lot of anxiety. We can feel quite down. It can affect our training, which we can talk about. And so then when we get towards the end of perimenopause, estrogen stops going on this massive roller coaster ride and starts declining. And so then we have the declining of our 2 major hormones that are really important for, our health, our bones, our muscles, like all of these things, that they're on a decline. And so when we're in perimenopause, just like when we're just coming through puberty, it can be very irregular. And no 2 cycle is the same, which can be extremely frustrating. But to know that that's like the next stage of the cycle. And yeah, we just have changing hormones yet again. They call it the second puberty. So that's how wild it can be.
Mm-hmm. And I think for more and more women, I think with environmental toxic exposures and our broken food system and fast-paced lives and so much stress, that more and more women are hitting perimenopause at a much earlier age.
I love how you bring up like our environment and the stress piece. So a big part of my work is in metabolic health. And that just means like how well our metabolism works. And our metabolism takes the food that we eat and turns it into energy. And we need that to happen to power our whole body. And if that is not working properly, then we start to see all these things come up in the body. And so the biggest thing that I work with women that are in their 40s, or even before, in their 30s, is that we work on their metabolic health. The more metabolically stronger you can be coming into perimenopause, the better experience that you will have. Because we want a strong metabolism. We want a body that's not stressed or that can manage the stress. And a big part of that is food. If we think about what is food for, food is to give our body fuel on a cellular level. So that's the metabolism. We take what we eat, it turns it into energy on a cellular level and powers our cells. Now, if we're not giving it the right types of food for our body that is easily digested and absorbed, that has a lot of, energy density and nutrition and vitamins and minerals, that's definitely going to affect our cells. And then if our body's not getting the right energy, it becomes very stressed and a lot of our systems become affected. And then that's what can cause increases in inflammation, irregular cycles, more painful cycles, and then we can have a harder time in perimenopause. So if we can start the work, like you said, Marcy, on what's our environment like? What are our stresses like? What's my metabolism like? How am I feeding my body? How am I moving my body? Is my body really good at managing and regulating stress? Because if it's not, and it's a shit show already in your 20s and 30s, it's going to be one hell of a ride when we start to get to our late 30s and our 40s.
Yeah, fair enough. And sleep is a huge one in that whole category, isn't it?
We have this belief that PMS is normal, but it's actually, it's pretty normal, but it's pretty common, but it's not normal.
We've normalized it.
We've normalized it. Whereas if I say to someone, no, actually, I might experience a tiny little bit maybe of discomfort in my lower back on the day one, or a tiny little bit of, how we feel that heaviness or the pressure, right in the base there, maybe, but other than that, I don't experience any PMS symptoms. I really never have. And that is astounding to a lot of women that really struggle. But it's telling you, the body's telling you that it's not supported. It's not supported. And so you need to figure out what you need to do to support it. And it all comes back to this stress, your environment, your toxins. So a lot of work that you do, what's going on? Is there an underlying medical condition? What are you ingesting? Whether that's through medication or through your food, all of these things are really important. And so that's the first place that I would start, is having a look, what's creating the most stress? Getting curious, why don't I have a regular cycle that arrives on time, mostly without symptoms?
Right.
And then in the second part, we can get into how do we understand our cycle and the tracking of our cycle.
So that was just a great segment. We talked a lot about our cycles and the science of the cycle. And now we're going to talk about understanding our cycles and how we can do that best.